I remember the day my world was shattered like shards of glass, each one cutting deeper than the last. My parents stood before us, beaming with pride, announcing that my younger sister would inherit our family's treasured lake house, a gift I had been promised by Grandma years ago in private whispers. It's funny how some memories can feel so far away and yet still have this piercing clarity to them. Like the sound of shattering glass still echoes through my mind when I close my eyes, transporting me back to that moment. It was one of those days that seeped into your bones like a cold winter wind, leaving you feeling numb and raw. I must have been about 12 or 13 at the time, with Emily just 5 or 6 years younger. Growing up, we were always close in age, but seemed to occupy different worlds within our family. My parents would often talk about how Emily was the baby of the house, and she'd get away with things that I wouldn't dare try. But back then, I tried not to think too much about it, maybe assuming that it was just part of being a sibling. Looking back now, though, it feels like there were warning signs all along. Little cracks in the foundation of our family's dynamics that eventually grew into this massive chasm. Emily would get extra cookies at dinner when I had to settle for a single serving, or my parents would take her on spontaneous weekend trips while leaving me behind with a babysitter. It wasn't until after Grandma passed away that I realized just how much favoritism was at play within our family. In those moments before the reading of the will, Emily seemed so carefree, like she knew something we all didn't. My parents would catch my eye and give me these reassuring smiles, but deep down, I sensed a sense of unease. It's hard to describe what it feels like when your whole world is turned upside down in an instant. Like the ground beneath you has disappeared, and you're left clinging to something for balance. As we gathered around Grandma's casket that day, my heart was racing with anticipation, or maybe fear. I couldn't quite tell. And then, just as we were about to begin the reading of the will, Emily stood up and gave our parents these big, expectant eyes. My heart sank in that moment. I remember thinking, this is it, like some sort of dark premonition had come true. You know, as a kid, I always thought our family was pretty normal. We'd have dinner together every Sunday, and we all seemed to get along. Most of the time, anyway. But looking back now, I can see that there were these subtle things going on beneath the surface. Like how my parents would always make sure Emily's room was spotless, while mine seemed to be a perpetual mess. They'd nag me about cleaning up after myself, but never said a word when Emily left her dirty clothes scattered all over the floor. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, just the usual sibling rivalry stuff. But it adds up, you know. Those little snubs and slighting comments that made me feel like I was somehow less important than my sister. I remember these moments where I'd try to talk to Mom about something, but she'd just be preoccupied with Emily's latest drama. Like when Emily broke her arm in 5th grade, and Mom spent the whole time by her side, nursing her back to health while I felt like an afterthought. Or when we'd go out as a family, and Dad would always make sure Emily got the biggest slice of dessert, even if I was the one who really wanted it. It's funny, or maybe not funny at all looking back on it now. It feels so sad. We were supposed to be this tight-knit unit, but in reality, we were just a family with two very different children. Emily got the attention, Emily got the praise, and I was left feeling like an invisible afterthought. I tried to push those feelings aside, telling myself that maybe I just wasn't good enough or that Emily genuinely deserved more love and affection. But deep down, it stung. A lot. And it's only now, as an adult, that I realize how damaging that favoritism was. Not just for me, but for our whole family. I think what hurts the most is that Grandma, who was like a second mom to me, always seemed to see me, to understand me in a way my parents never did. We'd spend hours by the lake, talking about life and dreams, and she'd listen with this kind of intensity. Like she really heard me, you know. But even Grandma's love wasn't enough to shield me from the favoritism within our family. And I think that's what made it so hard for me to speak up, because deep down, I felt like I was fighting against my own parents' expectations. I still remember the look on my mom's face when she announced Emily would be getting our grandma's lake house. A mix of pride and satisfaction, like she had finally been able to right some long-standing wrong in her family's history. But for me, it was like a punch to the gut. All those years, I'd pushed aside the feeling that something wasn't quite right, thinking maybe I just wasn't good enough or that Emily truly was more deserving. As we all gathered around the table, I could feel my heart sinking lower and lower with each passing moment. My dad looked at me with a hint of guilt in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a reassuring pat on the back. "Don't worry, kiddo," he said. "Your sister needs this more than you do." But what did that even mean? That I wasn't worthy of something my own grandma had promised me. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like a part of me was dying inside. All those times Grandma and I would walk by the lake, talking about the future and how I'd one day call that house home. It wasn't just about owning a piece of property. It was about the love and connection we shared. And now, it seemed like none of that mattered to my parents. Emily, on the other hand, looked like she had finally reached the pinnacle of happiness. She smiled brightly as she accepted the news, her eyes shining with tears. I tried to be happy for her, but it felt hollow, like a forced smile on a bad day. My mom and dad kept glancing over at me, their expressions softening every now and then. But even that kindness felt tainted, like they were trying to make up for years of neglect. I remember thinking about all the times I'd tried to talk to them about how I felt, about being ignored, overlooked, and dismissed. The countless hours spent in my room, wondering if there was something wrong with me or if they just didn't see me at all. But every time I tried to bring it up, Emily would swoop in with some story about how she needed help with her homework or how she was feeling left out, and suddenly the spotlight shifted back to her. As we sat around the table, waiting for the reading of Grandma's will to continue, I couldn't shake off the feeling that this was just another chapter in a long-standing saga. One where Emily got everything, and I was left with scraps. It wasn't until Mr. Jenkins showed up late, out of breath, that things started to change. But even then, it felt like we were only scratching the surface of something much deeper and more complex. As I looked around at my family, trying to read their expressions, I couldn't help but wonder, had they all been in on this charade for so long? Had they known Grandma's true intentions all along, or was this just a convenient excuse for them to justify their favoritism? The questions swirled in my head like a stormy sea, and I felt like I was drowning in them. I'll never forget the sound of my parents' voices as they announced that my sister would inherit our family's treasured lake house. It was like a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless and numb. I remember feeling like I was stuck in some kind of nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. As the room fell silent, I caught Emily's eye, but she just smiled smugly, like she'd won the ultimate prize. My parents beamed with pride, their faces a picture of joy and satisfaction. They seemed to think they were doing the right thing, that they were making an honest decision about who deserved the lake house. But what really hurt was that I remembered all those times Grandma and I would walk by the lake, talking about the future and how I'd one day own that house. It wasn't just a place, it was a symbol of love and connection between us. Grandma had promised me that house, not Emily, and now my parents were taking away what was rightfully mine. I felt like screaming, like demanding answers from them, but something inside me kept me quiet. Maybe it was the fear of losing control or the uncertainty about what would happen next. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about the lake house. It was about the way my parents had always treated Emily and me. Growing up, I'd tried to brush off these feelings, thinking maybe I just wasn't good enough or that Emily was genuinely more deserving. But now, watching them hand her the inheritance without a single challenge from me, I realized how unfair it all was. It was like they'd been playing a game of favorites for years, and I was just a pawn in their twisted game. The room seemed to be holding its breath as Mr. Jenkins finally appeared at the back of the room. He looked out of place, like he didn't belong among the family drama unfolding before him. But there was something about his worn suit and tired eyes that made me think he'd been through a lot more than just this one difficult day. He arrived late, out of breath, and began to explain that there was a second will hidden away by Grandma herself, a will that changed everything. With shaking hands, he revealed the contents, announcing that I, not Emily, was the rightful owner of the lake house. The room fell silent once again, this time like a collective gasp had been sucked out of everyone's lungs. My parents looked at each other, then back at me and Emily with a mix of shock, guilt, and embarrassment etched on their faces. It was as if they'd finally realized that their favoritism had been a huge mistake. I remember feeling like I was walking in slow motion, my heart pounding in my chest like a drumbeat. Time seemed to be stretching out, giving everyone a chance to take in the full weight of what Mr. Jenkins had just revealed. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went into fast forward. Emily looked stunned, her eyes wide with confusion and disappointment. My parents' faces were a mess of emotions, guilt, shame, embarrassment, and finally, a deep sense of regret. It was like they'd been slapped in the face by reality, forced to confront the truth about their own biases and prejudices. For years, I'd felt invisible, overlooked, and underappreciated within our family dynamics. But now, with Mr. Jenkins' revelation, I felt seen for who I truly was, not just a pawn in their twisted game of favorites. As the news sank in, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. My parents' faces were a picture of shock and guilt, their eyes darting back and forth between Emily and me as if searching for an escape route or some hidden explanation that would justify their actions. But it was too late. The damage was done. The cat was out of the bag, and our family's secrets were finally exposed. I remember feeling a mix of emotions, relief, anger, sadness, all swirling together in a messy storm inside me. It was as if I'd been carrying this weight for so long, and now that it had finally been lifted, I wasn't sure how to process it all. My mind was racing with questions. Why had they lied to me? Why did they favor Emily over me? And what did Grandma's second will mean for our family dynamic? Emily, on the other hand, seemed frozen in place. She looked like she'd been punched in the gut, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. I couldn't help but wonder if she knew about Grandma's original promise to me, or if she was just as oblivious to the truth as my parents had kept her. My mom took a step forward, her voice trembling as she tried to speak. "Honey, we didn't mean to hurt you," she stammered, her eyes welling up with tears. But it was too little, too late. The damage was done, and I couldn't just forgive them that easily. Dad, usually the rock of our family, looked like he'd been blindsided by this revelation. He kept glancing at my mom as if searching for some hidden script to follow or a magic phrase to undo what had happened. But there wasn't one. No amount of words could erase the hurt and betrayal we were all feeling. As I stood there, trying to process everything, I couldn't help but think about Grandma's second will and what it meant for our family's future. Would things go back to normal now that the truth was out? Or would this be a turning point, forcing us to confront the favoritism and lies that had been festering beneath the surface? Mr. Jenkins, still standing in the doorway with his briefcase in hand, seemed like an outsider observing our family's drama unfold. He nodded sympathetically at me before turning back to my parents. "You both knew about the second will?" he asked gently, his voice a stark contrast to the tension in the room. My mom shook her head, looking guilty but also relieved that she wasn't the only one who didn't know. "No, we had no idea," she said softly. But I knew better. They'd been playing this charade for years, and now it was time to face the music. As the silence hung in the air like a thick fog, something strange happened. It felt like our family's unspoken rules were changing before our very eyes. The dynamics that had kept us all stuck in this toxic cycle of favoritism and lies began to shift. I wasn't sure what the future held or how we'd navigate this new terrain together, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. It was as if Grandma's second will was more than just a document. It was a key that unlocked our family's true potential. A chance to break free from the shackles of favoritism and forge a new path together, one built on honesty, respect, and love. I remember the feeling of standing there, frozen in time, as the lawyer's words washed over me like a wave. It was as if I'd been punched again, but this time it wasn't just my heart that was reeling, it was my entire sense of identity. All those years of feeling invisible, of being pushed aside for Emily's sake, they all came flooding back in that moment. Looking around the room, I saw the mixture of shock and guilt etched on my parents' faces. My mom's eyes darted between me and Emily, as if searching for an explanation or maybe even a way to turn this into some kind of victory for her younger daughter. But it was too late. The truth had finally come out. I thought back to all those times Grandma and I would talk about the lake house, about how it was meant to be mine one day. She'd tell me stories about our family's history, about the love and laughter that had filled those walls over the years. It wasn't just a house. It was a connection to my past, to the people who had come before us. But now, as I looked at Emily, I saw something different. I saw a person who had been living in the shadow of my parents' favoritism for far too long. A person who had become so accustomed to being treated like royalty that she didn't even realize it was wrong. It was almost sad, really. As the weight lifted from my shoulders, I felt something else, a sense of peace. It was as if all those years of carrying around this secret, of feeling like I wasn't good enough or loved enough, they were finally released. My parents looked at me differently too, not with the same condescending smile or pitying glance that had become so familiar over the years. It was a new beginning, in more ways than one. The unspoken rules that had governed our family for so long were crumbling, and I knew it would take time to rebuild. But this time, we'd do it together on equal footing. No longer would some be more deserving than others. No longer would the past dictate our future. As I looked around at my family, trying to process everything that had happened, I caught Emily's eye for a brief moment. For the first time in years, I saw something other than rivalry and resentment staring back at me. I saw regret. It was as if she finally understood what it meant to be on the receiving end of her parents' favoritism. The room was still silent, but it felt different now. The air was thick with emotion, but this time it wasn't just anger or hurt. There was a sense of possibility. We'd taken the first step towards healing, towards facing the truth and embracing our true relationships. And as I stood there, surrounded by my family in all their imperfect glory, I knew that we would never be the same again. It's funny how life can change in an instant, isn't it? One moment of clarity, one revelation, and everything shifts. The weight on my shoulders began to lift not just because of Grandma's will, but because for the first time in years, I felt seen and heard. And as I looked around at my family, I knew that this was just the beginning, a new chapter in our story, one written with honesty, love, and equality. In that moment, something inside me broke free, a part of me that had been held captive by my parents' favoritism for far too long. It was as if I'd finally found my voice, my place within this family of ours. And it felt right. As the days passed after Grandma's second will was revealed, our family dynamic began to shift in ways both big and small. My parents, Mom especially, seemed to be navigating a new reality with trepidation. They'd always been so caught up in their own roles as parents, in trying to keep Emily and me happy and in line. But now that the truth was out, they were faced with the fact that they'd played favorites for years. One evening, over dinner, we had our first real conversation about it all. The tension was palpable, but at least everyone was willing to talk. My mom started by apologizing again, not just for lying to me, but also for making Emily feel like she was the favored one. "I know we did a terrible job of being fair," Mom said, her voice cracking with emotion. "We were so caught up in trying to keep peace and make sure you both were happy." I looked at Dad, who nodded in agreement. "We didn't mean for it to be like this," he added. "But we thought we were doing what was best for Emily, giving her a chance to shine." Emily spoke up then, her voice barely above a whisper. "What did you mean by shine?" she asked, her eyes fixed on Mom. Mom hesitated before answering. We wanted to give you the opportunities that I didn't have growing up. We thought it was what Grandma would want too." I felt a pang of sadness for Emily then. She'd been living in this bubble, thinking she was the favored one, only to find out now that her parents had their own motivations. "What about me?" I asked, feeling a mix of emotions swirling inside. "What did you mean by the daughter who deserved everything?" Mom looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes again. We thought Emily was just so much more like Grandma, strong and confident." I couldn't help but laugh, though it wasn't a happy sound. "Grandma loved me for who I am," I said gently. "Not because I'm strong or confident. She loved me for my quirks and flaws, too." Emily looked at me then, really saw me, and I felt a sense of connection we'd never shared before. As the conversation continued, it was clear that everyone was struggling to adjust to this new normal. We were all trying to figure out who we were in relation to each other, now that the favoritism had been exposed. One thing became clear: things wouldn't go back to the way they were before. Our family's relationships would never be the same again. And while it was scary and uncertain, there was also a sense of hope, a chance for us to rebuild on a foundation of honesty and equality. Over the next few weeks, we worked through our emotions together as a family. We talked about Grandma's second will and what it meant for each of us. Emily and I started reconnecting in ways that felt authentic, not forced by our parents' expectations. It wasn't easy, though. There were still moments when the old dynamics threatened to resurface. Like the time Mom tried to guilt-trip me into doing something for her, using Emily as an example of how I should be more selfless. I stood firm then, looking at her with a newfound sense of confidence. "Mom, I understand what you're saying," I said gently, "but this is about respecting each other's boundaries and decisions, not trying to one-up the other." Mom looked taken aback, but also understanding. It was progress, small as it may be. As we continued on this journey together, there were moments of triumph and moments of struggle. But through it all, I knew that our family would never be the same again, not because of Grandma's will or the secrets it revealed, but because of the love and honesty that had finally been unleashed within us. As we navigated this new terrain together, I began to notice subtle changes in Emily too. She seemed more relaxed around me, like the weight of her parents' favoritism was slowly lifting off her shoulders. We started spending more time together, doing things we both enjoyed, hiking, trying out new restaurants, and even taking a cooking class together. It wasn't just about bonding over shared interests. It was about creating a sense of equality between us. One evening, as we were sipping wine on the porch of our lake house, Emily turned to me with a curious expression. "Hey, sis," she said, her voice low and thoughtful. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," I replied, setting my glass down. I was thinking about Grandma's will and how it changed everything. She paused, collecting her thoughts. "I've been wondering, do you think Grandma did it to punish Mom and Dad for playing favorites?" I considered Emily's question carefully before responding. "Honestly, I don't think so." "Why not?" she asked, leaning in. "Because Grandma loved fairness. She believed in treating everyone equally, no matter what their circumstances were. If she had wanted to punish Mom and Dad, I'm sure she would have done it in a more public way." I chuckled, remembering the feisty woman my grandmother was. "Grandma wasn't one for subtlety." Emily nodded thoughtfully, her eyes sparkling with understanding. "You're right. Grandma was always about doing what's right, even if it meant going against tradition or expectations." As we sat there in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the lake, I felt a sense of gratitude toward my grandmother all over again. She had given me so much more than just a house. She'd given me a new perspective on life, one that emphasized equality and fairness. The conversation turned to other topics, but Emily's question lingered in my mind long after we parted ways for the evening. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but wonder if there were still more secrets hidden beneath our family's surface, waiting to be uncovered. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle changes in our parents too. They seemed more tired, like they were carrying the weight of their own guilt and regret on their shoulders. Mom would occasionally make a comment about how she wished things could have been different, how she wished we'd all been able to get along without the favoritism. Dad would nod in agreement, his eyes clouding over with memories of his own. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Emily and I had a private conversation that left me feeling both relieved and concerned. "Hey," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can I talk to you about something?" "Of course, what's on your mind?" I replied, wiping down the kitchen counter. "It's just, I've been thinking a lot about our parents and how they treated us." Emily hesitated before continuing. "I don't know if it's just me, but sometimes I feel like Mom is still trying to make up for lost time, like she's still trying to justify why she favored me all those years." I looked at Emily with surprise, unsure of how to respond. "You think Mom is regretful about what happened?" I asked gently. Emily nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. "Yeah, I do. And it makes me wonder if Dad feels the same way." As we talked more about our parents' feelings and motivations, I realized that Emily was right. There were still so many unanswered questions. Had Mom and Dad been trying to make amends for their past actions? Or had they just been trying to keep peace in the family? I didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear. We'd only just begun to scratch the surface of our family's complexities. As I looked at Emily, I felt a sense of gratitude toward her. She was finally seeing me, really seeing me, and it was an incredible feeling. But as we continued on this journey together, navigating the aftermath of Grandma's will and the secrets it revealed, I couldn't help but wonder what other surprises lay in store for us. Would our family ever be able to truly heal and move forward? Or would the wounds of favoritism continue to linger, a constant reminder of the past? As I sat on the porch with Emily, watching the stars twinkle to life above, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping in. We'd made progress as a family, no doubt about it, but there were still so many questions left unanswered. And now that we were starting to confront our parents' actions and motivations, I couldn't shake the feeling that things might get even more complicated. "You know, Emily," I said softly, turning to her with a concerned expression, "I've been thinking. What if Mom and Dad's favoritism wasn't just about us? What if it was about something bigger, like their own insecurities or fears?" Emily looked at me thoughtfully, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You mean Like maybe they were trying to compensate for something, she ventured. I nodded, feeling a sense of excitement and trepidation all at once. Exactly. Maybe they felt like they'd failed us in some way, or that we needed their approval to feel loved and accepted. Emily's eyes widened as she grasped the implications. That makes so much sense, she breathed. I mean, think about it. Mom always talked about how hard Grandma was on her when she was growing up. Maybe she felt like she had to overcompensate with us, to make sure we knew how much she loved and valued us. As we continued to discuss the possibilities, I couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder at just how complex our family dynamics were. There were so many layers to unravel, so many motivations and desires that had been hidden beneath the surface for years. One evening, as we were sitting in the living room, Mom called us into the kitchen with an air of determination on her face. Girls, she said, her voice firm but tentative, I want to talk to you about something important. Dad stood beside her, his eyes locked onto mine and Emily's. We exchanged a look, sensing that this was going to be big. Mom. I asked gently, my heart pounding with anticipation. We've been thinking, Mom began, her voice trembling slightly, and we realize now that our favoritism towards you, Emily, might have hurt you. Emily looked up at me, her eyes shining with tears. I felt a surge of emotions, sadness, anger, but also a deep sense of understanding. It's okay, I said softly, taking Emily's hand in mine. We know what happened, and we're working through it together as a family. Mom nodded, her face etched with regret. I'm so sorry for my part in this, she whispered, for not being the mother you deserve to have. As we hugged Mom tightly, I felt a sense of release wash over me. It wasn't easy, but our parents were finally facing their mistakes head-on. The days that followed were filled with long conversations and tearful apologies. Our family was healing in ways both big and small, and it was clear that our love for each other had been the thread that held everything together all along. As I lay in bed one night, feeling my heart swell with gratitude towards Emily and Mom and Dad, I realized something profound. Sometimes it takes a little bit of pain to reveal just how much we truly care about one another. And as I drifted off to sleep, lulled by the sound of crickets outside and the warmth of our family's love surrounding me, I knew that no matter what the future held, we'd face it together. I woke up early the next morning feeling a mix of emotions: relief, gratitude, but also a hint of skepticism. It was as if my parents' apologies had opened Pandora's box, releasing all sorts of questions and doubts into our family dynamic. I knew that healing wouldn't be easy or quick, but I was determined to support Emily through this process. As we got ready for the day, Emily seemed quieter than usual, lost in thought. Hey, I said, trying to snap her out of it. What's on your mind? She hesitated before responding. I don't know if I can ever fully trust Mom and Dad again. Her words cut deep, but I understood where she was coming from. We spent the morning at the lake house, clearing out some of the clutter that had accumulated over the years. The task was therapeutic, a way to distract ourselves from the weight of our parents' favoritism. As we worked, Emily and I talked about everything and nothing, trying to make sense of the new reality we found ourselves in. After lunch, Mom called us into the living room once again. This time, she had a small box with her, one that looked eerily familiar. Girls, she said, her voice trembling slightly, I want to show you something. She opened the box, revealing a collection of old letters and photographs. Where did these come from? Emily asked, her curiosity piqued. These were Grandma's, Mom explained. She wrote them for both of us, but mostly for you, Emily. There. A way for her to apologize, I guess. As we began to read the letters, tears streamed down our faces. Grandma's words were raw and honest, a reflection of the love she had for both of us. The letters revealed that Grandma had been aware of Mom and Dad's favoritism from early on. She had tried to talk to them about it, but they hadn't listened. Instead, they'd continued down their own path, ignoring her warnings and advice. As we finished reading the last letter, I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. My grandmother had been so wise and loving, yet our parents had ignored her pleas for help. They'd hurt us both in ways that were still unfolding. I looked up at Emily, who was staring at Mom with a mix of emotions on her face. Mom, she said softly, why didn't you ever tell us the truth? Mom took a deep breath before responding. I was scared, sweetie. I thought if we talked about it openly, things might get worse. But I realize now that I made a terrible mistake by keeping secrets from you both. As our conversation continued, I couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden beneath the surface of our family's dynamics. Had Grandma been aware of more than just Mom and Dad's favoritism? Was there something deeper at play, something that had shaped their actions for years? The questions swirled in my mind as we left the living room, still reeling from the revelations. As I looked over at Emily, who seemed lost in thought once again, I knew that our journey was far from over. "What do you think, Em?" I asked her gently. "Do you think Grandma's letters are just the beginning?" Emily hesitated before responding. "I don't know, but I think we're about to find out."